geeks and geekettes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, my dominant herren, senors and senoritas, gats and gittens. Welcome once again to the College of Knowledge, the College of Comic Book Knowledge in any case, where you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living, oddly enough, is write comic books. We go deep this episode. We go deep. It's like a PBS version of Ask Chuck Dixon today. So strap in. And before you do that, I will remind you up front that brunobookstore@gmail.com is the best way to reach me with your questions, your fascinating, absorbing, engaging, and sometimes puzzling questions. brunobookstore@gmail.com. Let's not waste another second of your precious time. Christopher Cohen, with the Epstein files now fully public, and showing exactly how one predator built an entire cross-industry machine of enablers, do you think the time is right for a new vigilante storyline where the hero accepts that real justice will never happen and decides to methodically erase every name on the client list? I know Leifeld Captain is already gone after Traffickers with brutal efficiency, and Mike Barron's Private American has handled the smuggling angle, but neither has tackled a single conspiracy that simultaneously owns corporations, universities, and the halls of power. If this story had broken back at the time Mike and you were on Punisher titles, I could imagine you both teaming up for a multi-part epic, with Frank adopting the mission running across the line. So your take on an equivalent character built specifically for this kind of broad, protected network takedown today? What am I doing? I've kind of visited this territory in Leifeld Captain, and even though the child abuse pedophile ring in Leifeld Captain, which ran over 3 books, that story ran over 3 books, isn't as extensive as Jeffrey Epstein's was, or probably remains. How could it be? I mean, Epstein was global. But Leifeld takes down a pretty extensive campaign that involves businessmen, politicians, and all the rest of it. If you want to read those, it's sort of a trilogy within the series. Leiveld's Home, Leiveld's Hunt, Leiveld's Prey covers the story of Leifeld quite effectively taking a pedophile ring out by the roots. So that might be something you want to read. Boy, Mike and I would have had, if the Epstein thing had happened back then and we were still both on the Punisher, yeah, that would have been awesome. That would have been awesome, running like a crossover over all 3 titles. But I don't know if the pedophiles in the comic book industry at the time would have been happy about that. I say at the time as if there aren't any in the comic book industry now. But yeah, I mean, that would have been pretty cool. And of course, Mike's on the same page as I am. We have vigilante characters we write, and we just don't give a damn. Further proof of that for me will be the release of Black Warrant, which I want to be called a racist for Black Warrant more times than Mike Barron got called a racist for Private American. That is my goal. I want to stir the pot. I want to cause more outrage with Black Warrant. So, and when you read it, you'll know what I mean. So you may lose friends if they catch you reading Black Warrant. But yeah, it would have been cool to have Frank Castle go up against pedophiles. I don't think Marvel would ever have allowed that to happen. But we can all dream, can't we? Twin spin. Christopher Cohen is back with, you are a longtime fan and reader of the Comics Buyer's Guide back when it was a weekly Bible of the industry, right alongside the other greats of that era, Amazing Heroes, Comics Interview, the Comics Journal, Comics Scene, and the rest. Those magazines didn't just cover the big two, they celebrated the full spectrum of what was being published and gave fans real news, reviews, and behind the scenes insight. Do you think the time is right to revive something in the same spirit, a print or digital magazine that promotes the entire world of comics today, not just mainstream American superhero books? I'm thinking a publication that gives equal love to manga, banda design, fumetto, and other European formats, crowdfunded indie projects, small press gems, and everything in between. If you agree it's needed, how do you think such a publication could actually get off the ground today? And who do you reckon would be the best position to publish and sustain it? An established company, a Kickstarter-backed collective, one of the big distributors, or someone else entirely? Um, yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one. Um, because the nature of publishing now, uh, nobody's buying magazines. You would have to get advertisers. It probably wouldn't be that hard. You could probably get in the industry advertisers. You could probably get the manga companies and others. I mean, I love the idea, but I don't know that. I mean, forget a magazine. You couldn't get a magazine off the ground. A digital site, maybe. The problem is comics are so niche marketed now. People that read manga, we can see that in the numbers. The majority of people that read manga don't read American comics. If they did, American comics would sell more. I mean, manga outsells American comics by magnitudes. So obviously, there's not a lot of crossover there between the two. And would people that read manga want to read about what's going on at DC and Marvel? Would people at DC and Marvel want to read about what's going on in Europe? I kind of doubt it. But if you made it a multilingual site, I think you could make it work. I'm just coming up with this now. I didn't do a lot of I don't do a lot of thinking about these questions. You're getting my hot take every single time on this show for the most part, unless I've already answered a question or have thought about a subject recently. But if you were to make it multilingual, which you could, AI translating programs have advanced tremendously, translating things into colloquial versions of all the various languages that you can plug into it. Everything from Spanish to Japanese. So you probably could do a website if you made it multilingual, because people in Europe and in Asia are interested in American comics, even if it's from afar, just to see what's happening. They're interested in the news. So you might be able to do that. Who would finance it? Who would run it? I don't know. There's plenty of savvy people, but what you would want to do is make absolutely certain it wasn't political in any way. That you were covering everything regardless, and of course it would get enormous support from the crowdfunding community, because we're I refuse to call it Comicsgate. Us in the crowdfunding community, us in the truly independent mom and pop comic book industry, we're always looking for ways to get noticed, and any new site that covers comics is going to get bombarded with requests from us for interviews and coverage and stuff like that. So that's not a problem. Yeah, I think it could be done. I mean, if there was someone willing to put money into it, I don't think they'd make any money out of it unless the advertising got hot. If you can convince the manga publishers to advertise, you might get something there. But you mentioned a bunch of the early fanzines and comic book coverage publications, and the granddaddy of them all was the Buyer's Guide. I'm teaching the youngsters here. It was the Buyer's Guide, and it was a weekly paper. Primarily, it was published by the same people who would publish like papers about porcelain or movie memorabilia, collectibles. And it was largely to help you find deals, but it became like this nexus for comic book fans to come together. It was like a website on paper or a message board on paper, and the letters column was always lively. with a lot of comics pros coming to argue with one another. Uh, and it was a vital publication, and it was largely the only way you could find out what was going on in comics at all. And also, you mentioned foreign comics, discovering foreign comics. Buyer's Guide would have dealers selling manga, selling comics from the UK, selling comics from Europe. And this was, an introduction to a larger world. And Don and Maggie Thompson, they ran a tight ship. This is a neat little publication that every comic book fan looked forward to getting in the mail each week. Amazing Heroes was another one, fun publication, helping promote the industry. And it was doing this when the industry, Amazing Heroes comes along at the beginning of the comics boom of the 80s and stays around for a while. But it was a good magazine. I got it every month. Comics Journal, of course, I think the Comics Journal is still out there. A little too highbrow, a little too intellectual, a little too full of itself for me. But, that's the way things go. Now, the most vital, and you didn't mention it, the most vital publication for any comic book fan at the time was the Comic Reader. And it was this little digest-sized, Xerox printed publication. These guys must have made a lot of money off of this somehow, because every comic shop would get these, and everybody bought it. And I think the cover says it's like 50 cents. And what it would do is it was like it would list every upcoming comic, who wrote it, who drew it, a story synopsis, and some cover recreations. So you could basically plan what you wanted to buy. This is what was available to you before the Diamond catalog. So you would know what comics were upcoming, so you could place orders with your retailer or know to look out for on the newsstand or whatever. And it was, I never missed an issue. I had piles of these things at one point that I just unwisely threw away. But could something like that? Yeah. I mean, as long as it's not like Wizard. I really think Wizard damaged the comic book industry by creating like a celebrity culture. It's sort of Bonfire of the Vanities. It encouraged, people who already had egos to make their egos bigger. I always call it the Tiger Beat of comics. And it created a culture, weirdly, among editors. Editors would read Wizard magazine and make decisions on what talent they wanted to hire or who they would go after to do the books based on Wizard's top 10 hottest writers and artists list. And it was like, this is insane. Those lists are arbitrary, like entirely arbitrary. Maybe the guy writing the list got drunk at a con with one of the artists and decided, I'm gonna make him number one. That guy's awesome, dude. And they make him number one. Nothing to do with how actually popular that person was. And I say this as someone who made the list a couple of times, but I didn't take it seriously because I knew I only made it a couple of times because I ran into those guys at a con like 3 weeks earlier, or I attended Toy Fair. They were very nice, particularly Scott Beatty, to get me into Toy Fair. Because you remember Toy Fair magazine? They would make sure every year, if I wanted to, I could go to the Toy Fair in New York City, which, if you're a toy geek, it's nirvana. I mean, you get to see all the upcoming toys in this big splashy show. You get to walk around and see what's coming up in the toy world from all over the world. It's like, whoa! So yeah, I mean, they were great guys, but that magazine was not good. But yeah, I'd like to see what you're talking about. I hope someone does it. If there's any multi-millionaires or billionaires listening right now, would you please consider this? Would you please consider Christopher's suggestion? Just for me. Triple spin. Christopher Cohen is back with, regarding Peter Parker arriving as a man in full, if he and Mary Jane went on to conceive, do you think he was already significantly further along to that maturation compared with most adult males due to his vow after Uncle Ben's death? And do you think if he did have children with Mary Jane, that he should have retained his superhero identity or retired it? If the latter, this seemed to be what they initially planned with the return of the Spider clone. Peter and Mary going off to raise their child while Ben Reilly stepped in to carry on the mantle. Yeah, the thing about it is, Peter Parker, he's kind of perpetually trapped. I mean, I don't know if this is true anymore, but for 30 years, he was, or more, he was perpetually trapped in his early 20s. He was still a young man. I mean, they had him graduate from high school and go to college, but still, we can imagine he's 23. When do you graduate from college? 22, 21, 22. We can imagine he's still 24, 25. His frontal lobes, his brain's still developing. He's still a kid. He's still not a full man intellectually, despite his vows to Uncle Ben. That's childhood trauma. And we don't take it lightly, but it's not. He doesn't make the decisions an adult would make. And when it comes to Mary Jane, for lack of a better term, high school sweethearts. Not only Mary Jane went to high school with Peter in the comics, did she? I don't recall. It was always that other chick that he was chasing around, but whose name I can't recall. Was that Betty Brant, or was that the girl who worked at the newspaper? Peter Parker wasn't much of a player, but he had a lot of women in his life. So, I don't think they would ever have just had him and Mary Jane go off into the sunset for an extended comic book honeymoon until we forgot about them. I don't think that was going to happen. And the Spider Clone thing, let's face it, the Spider Clone thing, they try to convince you that Peter Parker was going for good. The same way we tried to convince you that Batman's back being broken took Bruce Wayne out of the picture forever, or that Superman was dead, or the multitude of other comic book characters who have been killed in comics are gone forever. So that was just a gimmick, and they would play it out long enough to try to convince you that it was for real. But they're never replacing Peter Parker. Peter Parker is Spider-Man. Spider-Man is Peter Parker. They are not the same. I mean, if you were to replace Superman with someone else or Batman with someone else, as we learned, readers don't like that. They want the characters, and then there's good reason for that. These are Clark Kent, Bruce Wayne, Logan, Diane Prince, Peter Parker. These are all great characters on their own, in addition to their association with costume heroes. So you don't want to mess with that. Quadruple spin. Christopher Cohen is back with, regarding your Nightwing run, do you consider your planned run was cut short, or you said all you wanted to with the character? My reason for asking is, at its conclusion, Blockbuster is still in control of the city. Did you have a final showdown plan between the two? Further, Dick doesn't get any closer to exposing the corruption of the police or taking down the corrupt chief from inside with his secret group of good cops. I'm also curious what ending you had for the ongoing story with Soames, or did you intentionally leave these plots open-ended so the title's new writer could build on what you had established instead of completely resetting things? Yeah, I mean, I gave 6 months notice at DC before I left. I said, look, I'll complete the next 6 issues. I owe 6 more scripts on Robin, Birds of Prey, Nightwing, and I will set up the next writer. And so I left some stuff dangling because, readers who don't pay any attention to the credit box, what do they care if there's a new writer? I mean, they shouldn't even, ideally, they shouldn't even notice there's a new writer, because they're going to pick up where I left off the way that I picked up where the writer before me left off on series that I jumped into. Because the readers are foremost. The readers are the ones you have to please, and not yourself. And if you have all these awesome ideas and ways to take things, you do that later after you've sort of inserted yourself into whatever series it is, and gotten comfortable, and now you can begin playing with your own ideas and stuff like that. But you got to resolve stuff. You got to kind of keep status quo. And certainly, Devin Grayson, who took over, was welcome to wrap up Blockbuster, welcome to wrap up the Corrupt thing. And I left the fate of Dudley Soames up to her. If you remember, Tad Ryerstad, the Ersatz Nightwing, and Dudley Soames ends up in a room together, and we there's gunfire. We don't see what happened, but there's gunfire. And I left it up to Devin. I said, one of them makes it out of that room alive. It's up to you which one you want it to be, which one you find more interesting or can play with, because this stuff doesn't belong to me. So I wanted to leave all the toys in place for the next person to come play with. And it wasn't cut short. As I said, it was I gave 6 months notice, so I had 6 issues in which I was very aware my era, as it were, was coming to an end on these titles. Birds of Prey, not so much. Birds of Prey, I kind of got to some stories I meant to get to, I wanted to get to, so I got all of them out of my system, and it's just, it ends on the end of an adventure, and the next writers pick up with their own adventure. There wasn't a lot of dangling subplots left there. But yeah, whatever. Quintuple spin. The very rare, hardly ever seen, hardly ever spotted quintuple spin. And it's all yours, Christopher Cohen, who says, you mentioned Rob Liefeld hired you to write Captain America for Heroes Reborn, then totally ignoring your plot for the finished product. I'm curious what you think changed, given he had previously hired you to write Prophet Volume 2. How did your writing Prophet come about, i.e., were you actively seeking out work at Extreme Studios, or were you approached by them? And was this just this title that you were offered, or were you given the option of choosing from several? If only this one, were there other titles in their stable that you would have been more interested in writing? Were you satisfied with your run, or were there other ideas you would like to have explored with the character? As to Captain America, for those who aren't aware, Marvel was going to bring the image creators back to sort of reboot or create a different version of just play around with the classic Marvel characters. And Liefeld got assigned or chose Captain America, and he approached me to write it, because at the time I was doing some writing for Extreme. And I talked to him about it, and I said, look, if I'm going to work on this, I'm going to be going back to his World War II origins and playing around with them somewhat, playing around with who Bucky was and what Captain America's involvement was. And then the story will jump forward to present day and some of the repercussions of his actions in World War II playing out now. I mean, classic Captain America story. I didn't invent that. It's classic stuff. And I said, I'm a bit of a history nut, and I'm a bit of a pain in the butt about accuracy, and I'm going to send you reference. And American uniforms, German uniforms, tanks, planes, they got to look. And I was very, very frank with them. I said, Rob, you've gotten lazy. You used to be able to draw. You used to be able to lay out a panel. I know it. I saw all your work at DC. You showed a lot of promise, but you're just sort of phoning it in now. I was very, very frank with him, because I didn't want to take this job if it was just going to be another, Rob Liefeld, quick cash grab, fandango. So I wrote out a very detailed plot line, and I said, I want to do full script because I want to help you out with the storytelling. I want to help you out with blocking these scenes. Oh yeah, that's great. That's great. That's great. Well, that's the last time I talked to him. So I sent in the plot line, and I keep trying to get a hold of him. And of course, all I can get a hold of is his people, because everybody at Image at that time had people. And it was like dealing with a Hollywood studio. And I never got, okay, you can go. He's looking at the plot. He's still looking at the plot, and Marvel's looking at the plot. I'm like, okay, well, as soon as it's approved, let me know, and I'll get started on the full script. And they kept delaying and delaying and delaying. And finally, they sent me an email saying, we're sending you artwork. And I said, well, artwork for what? Right. And over my fax machine, a fax machine was a machine, kids, that would spit out paper with pictures and words on it. Anyway, you could telephone pictures over the telephone lines. Anyway, so this half a roll of fax paper, it comes out with those hideous, amateurish, juvenile drawings I've ever seen in my life. Airplanes that, I swear to God, I drew better airplanes on my math papers in the third grade. And there's almost no attention to the story I wanted to tell. And it's all just crap. It's all just awful. So I call the Extreme offices. Of course, I can't get Rob. I get one of his people. And I said, look, I'm quitting this book. I'm quitting. I don't want my name on it. I don't want to be associated with it. Rob made me a promise that he would at least make a half-hearted attempt to work hard on this title. And I don't see any of that. Plus, I was supposed to write a full script, and you basically lied to me all this time that Rob's been working off of my plot line that I sent in, like 5-page plot line, rather than working from a full script. So I'm out. And I remember, I can't remember the name of the guy that answered the phone, the poor bastard that answered the phone. But he said, well, what do you mean by this? And I said, man, like, ask your mom what I mean by this. I mean, do I have to spell it out? I quit. I'm not negotiating for a higher page rate, because page rate was sweet. I don't want to be paid. I don't want my name on this. I'm walking away. You get some other, you get some hack to put the words on these pages, because I ain't doing it. I'm out. And that was it. And then I never went public about it. I never said, because I was announced to write it, I never said anything about why I quit or any of that. But of course, Rob immediately, goes to the microphones, goes to Wizard, goes to whoever will listen, and say that I was fired because my story didn't meet with his editorial standards. Well, anybody who believed that believes Stan Lee created Spider-Man. I mean, you'd have to be you'd have to be a mouth-breathing, room temperature moron to believe that I couldn't meet Rob Liefeld's editorial standards. But I just want to make all that clear. Now, why he reached out to me to write Prophet, I think it was largely he wanted what everyone else had. Okay, so I'd written Team 7 for Jim Lee, Wildstorm, and it did well, did really, really well. And I think Rob's like, ooh, it's a shiny new writer. I want him too. And so they reached out, could you do some work for me? Which I did. And again, the page rates were fantastic. These books sold like hotcakes, like hotcakes with fentanyl in them. And just sort of cruised along on Prophet. It's never a character I was particularly interested in. I was talking to a buddy of mine, Steve Downs, about how, I don't really get this character. I'm just writing, violent, bloody adventures for him, trying to put in some intrigue that makes sense, bring the readers back every month. And my buddy Steve said, well, I'd love to help you out with plot lines. I liked that book. And so Steve and I co-wrote if you see Prophet, Steve's name is prominent next to mine. So he was a big help on writing that book and getting me to understand what the hell it was all about. I think Rob was somewhat happy about it. Although at that time I was avoiding phone calls from him. And was it Stephen Pratt or Platt? Pratt. I was avoiding because they would get me on the phone, keep me on the phone for hours and hours talking about Prophet. And I was like, wow, just wow. Those are some weird conversations. Mostly me just listening or putting the phone on speaker while I did something else like bagging comics or something like that. But that association ended. I don't have any good feelings about ever working with Rob Liefeld, to tell you the truth. But largely he wanted me to write comics for him for the same reason that he wanted a Ferrari, because all the other Image guys had a Ferrari. And he wanted to have a cartoon show because all the other Image guys had a cartoon show. And that's the way we went. Oh, hey, shocking. You did it. You made this happen, Christopher. The sex tuple spin. I had to create a new graphic. I said I might have to do this because you people were asking so many questions, bombarding me with these awesome, awesome questions. And I'm struggling to satiate your curiosity. But here you go, the very first sextuple spin. I don't know what's next. What's next after sextuple? I might have to invent a new word. I don't know. I'll look it up. Anyway, let's get on to your groundbreaking world record question. Christopher Cohen again with, you've previously spoken about revealing Moon Knight's god Khonshu as associated with the ancient Egyptian vizier, Egyptian vizier. Can you share how you would have gone about revealing this for the title if you had the opportunity at the time? Yeah, I was always uncomfortable with the fact that Mark Spector, who was one of the few Marvel characters who was, it was confirmed he was a Jew. He was a Jewish guy. His dad was a rabbi, and he had all these connections to the Jewish community as Mark Spector. I thought that was interesting. But what I didn't understand was, why does he get his powers from an Egyptian god? A pagan god. It didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And so I thought, well, there's a way around this. There's a way to explain this, and no one had ever explained it. I had a Western Civ teacher in the short time I spent at community college, and he was a guy, he had quit the seminary to be a priest and become a teacher at a community college. So, and he was telling us his own theory, which I found fascinating. Even if it's not true, it's fascinating. His theory about, in the Old Testament, Joseph, one of the early prophets, Old Testament prophets, becomes the vizier to the Egyptian pharaoh, even though he's known to be a Hebrew. And he was like, well, how could that happen? There's no way in the world the Egyptians would allow a Hebrew to rise to a position of that level. If you remember, Moses was a vizier to the pharaoh, but they didn't know Moses was a Jew. Moses doesn't find out until in adulthood that he's a Hebrew. And then that's when all the trouble starts for the pharaoh, all the plagues and all the rest of it. But anyway, Joseph rises, and he's a great vizier. He saves the Egyptians from famine, and he does all these other, he solves a mystery. If you ever read that story, that's a great one. It may be apocryphal. I'm not even sure it's in the Old Testament, but it's a great story about someone stealing from the temple. And anyway, so my thing was, and his theory was that there was a period where the Hebrews, who were a nomadic tribe, they were like the Mongols. They came out of Central Asia, and they just ran roughshod over everybody. The Hebrews were a tough bunch, and they were set on conquest. They were set on finding themselves a promised land, as we all know. And they show up in Egypt and take over, and they put themselves in the place of the pharaoh, and they adopt the Egyptian hierarchy, not their religion, but the political hierarchy of the Egyptian pharaohs. And so for a period of, I don't know how long, this teacher theorized the Hebrews actually ran Egypt. Well, it makes perfect sense. Joseph shows up. He's a smart guy. He's got all the answers. He becomes vizier because he's part of a Hebrew regime. And my thoughts were, for Mark Spector, getting back to Moon Knight, in my story, like a Talmudic scholar who was a friend of his dad, Spector's dad was a rabbi. A Talmudic scholar finds new pages to the Old Testament. He finds like a Dead Sea Scrolls kind of document about Khonshu and about this vizier that supposedly relates to Mark Spector's past and gives him these powers. And the Talmudic scholar reveals to Mark Spector that he doesn't get his powers from an Egyptian god. He gets his powers from an ancient Egyptian mystic who was a Hebrew. And so it all kind of ties back in. And I presented this. I thought this would make a hell of a story arc because it would end up, obviously in an Egyptian adventure, an Indiana Jones type adventure with Moon Knight. I think, with pyramids and traps and, femme fatales. And I'm like, this would be a great storyline. And my editor, Danny Fingeroth, at the time said, we don't want to emphasize the Spectre's Jewish. And I'm like, wow, really? And it was dropped. It was dropped. And I talk about this all the time, hoping that even if I don't get the credit for it, that someone gloms onto this idea, because at its base, the character makes no sense to me. So that's what that was all about. And congratulations to Christopher Cohen for the very first sextuple spin. Ian Potash. It's long question week at Ask Chuck Dixon. Okay. How did you approach the character of Catwoman after DC relaunched her continuity in the 80s? I've been reading those initial stories to work up to your take on her solo series, and it's pretty appalling stuff. Catwoman was a teenage prostitute that suffers a pretty horrific sexual assault. Her costume and whip were explained as preferences of a client. Anyways, shout out to Peter Milligan, Doug Mensch, Joe Duffy for reframing 90s Catwoman as a mystery adventure story starring a rogue cat burglar. Why overthink it? Did any of the revised backstory impact your stories, or were you able to ignore it without much consequence? I don't think anyone at DC, outside of the initial editor for Frank Miller, liked any of that stuff about Catwoman. And it's a shame. What he did to Catwoman, he made her a tragic figure, which was such a waste, because of every character in the DC universe, the only character that's well adjusted enough to like herself and be comfortable in her own skin and just fine with how she lives her life is Selina Kyle. She's just like, hey, I'm living large. I'm doing what I want to do. Yeah, I'm breaking the law, but I'm not really hurting anybody. And I'm just sort of a, glad gal out there having my own adventures. And that's the way I approached it. I mean, I loved writing that stuff because you get to write a heist story. Every issue was some version of a heist story. And I love heist stories. And that's what Catwoman should be. She shouldn't be some, messed up neurotic like she was in Batman Returns or in Frank Miller's run. And frankly, bring in the prostitution angle, and I mean, that's really super creepy. That stuff does not belong in superhero comics, because superhero comics are, as I always say, they are childhood wish fulfillment fantasies. There's no harm in adults reading about them. The wish fulfillment still works. I wish I was as strong as Superman. I wish I had a lasso that made people tell the truth. It's fine. That's fine. But when you introduce the sexual to these characters, it becomes a little creepy. It gets fetishistic. It's like, ew. And then you begin to question everything. Why are they doing this? I mean, what kind of a sick person would run around in a spandex outfit at night, keeping to the shadows? I mean, what's wrong with them? But if you keep that childlike, goofy quality to comics, they're appealing, fun, wholesome entertainment. But Frank Miller wasn't happy, and a lot of others, Alan Moore wasn't happy. They had to bring in the weird shit. So, and here we are. the end result. Mainstream comics, most of them you can't even show to a kid. Batman comics you can't show to a child. There's something wrong with that. David Jordan, I'm unclear what the deal is with Compass Comics reprinting Storming Paradise. Is it going to be collected as its own thing or under the banner of Two-Fisted Manly Tales? Yes, Storming Paradise, a war epic by Butch Geis and I that we did back in the 2000s. I forget when. We did it through Wildstorm for DC, and it was a creator-owned project. And Butch and his estate, me and Butch's estate, have got the rights back. The rights are returned to us by DC along with all the files. And I approached Graham Nolan about publishing it, and we talked a little bit about it. And we were going to he was going to publish it as a straight up Storming Paradise collection. And then he rethought it, and he presented me with the idea of doing it as the second issue of giant-sized two-fisted manly tales, because he wants to return to that. He wants to have a bookshelf of these someday from different creators, and the whole thing would be published in this hardcover volume. And he showed me the covers of both the standalone Storming Paradise and the giant size, and I agreed with him that the giant size two-fisted manly tales cover was more attractive, more in your face. And also it's part, Graham's a one-man shop. He's got his loyal following, and he knows how to market to them. And I had no problem with this. And I don't think Butch would have had a problem either. We're here to sell comics, friends, not just tell you about them and all the rest of it. But it's so yeah, it'll be presented in this format that you see right here. This is Graham's cover. We're gonna have a couple of the original covers by Butch, and then Graham did this cover I really like. Very much in keeping with the tone that Butch established for the previous covers. And that's all going to be coming to you from Compass Comics. I think the 25th is when we launch the campaign, and I hope it does well. I presented it to Graham because I thought it was a good fit, and he agreed, and it turned out it was an even better fit than we thought. If you don't know what Storming Paradise is, it's kind of a what-if story, but it's a what-if story that almost happened. It was planned to happen. It was supposed to happen. The invasion of Japan at the end of World War II, or the invasion of Japan to end World War II. And the United States had a plan because the United States was going to go it alone. The other allies wanted no part of it. It was called Operation Olympus. And we were going to invade amphibious D-Day style landings starting on the southern islands of Japan. And had this happened, had the atomic bombs not forced Japan to surrender unconditionally, this invasion would have happened. Troops were ready to go. The men who had served in Europe were being told they were going to get some training in the U.S. and then disembark for Asia. Estimates at the time, estimates in 1945 for Operation Olympus were 1 million American dead. 1 million American dead. The Japanese plans for defense, which were declassified sometime in 2000, showed the Japanese plans for defending the islands, which included a bunch of airplanes they had hidden in South Korea, every civilian being supplied with weapons, even if they were just pointy bamboo stakes. Defenses were being dug, and the orders were, we are going to fight to the last person, be it man, woman, or child. Our guys would have had to fight for every inch of Japan. And the tragic end result, in addition to 1 million American dead, God knows how many Japanese dead, and ultimately the end of Japan as a culture. The United States was not feeling real good toward Japan in World War II, and they would not have tolerated leaving a single brick standing on another brick in Japan. It would have been the end of Japan as a culture. And that's a tragedy too horrible to contemplate, to erase a people from the planet. But that's what would have had to have happened due to the will of the American people versus the will of the Japanese. But this tells the beginning of the story, and I know you'll like it. It's not the feel-good book of the year by any means, but if you like war comics at all, I can guarantee you're going to dig this one. Of course, Butch's art is freaking gorgeous. Twin Spin. David Jordan is back with, looking at Bob Harden's art for Seven Deadly Sinners makes me wish you two had worked together at DC or Marvel. A car chase issue of Batman, Nightwing, or Punisher with his art would have been excellent. It gives me an excuse to show some artwork of Bob's. Yeah, I think I proposed Bob coming on Punisher and doing some sort of car-oriented thing. I think, and Don Daly thought his artwork would look too cartoonish, which I was like, no, you're wrong. It would be special. I mean, aren't you the guy that let Punisher meet Archie? I mean, give me a break, Dan. I think Bob would have killed. Absolutely would have killed, and it would have been so much fun to write. Uh, you know, the Punisher van and some sort of whatever. It would have been Fury Road with the Punisher, with me and Bob on it. And if you aren't aware of Seven Deadly Sinners, and I've been trying to make you aware for a month, it's Bob and I doing a retro 1970s outlaw biker flick. You might have seen it at the drive-in if you snuck in when you were a kid. And it's violent and bloody and partial nudity. The people at RIPA, they say it's rated R. I say it's a 1970s PG. We don't get too crazy, but it's also a Dick's Hard production from our good friends at Ripascent. So check it out. There'll be a link below, of course. And that's it for this week. Thank you for watching, for listening, for congratulations on some awesome, deeply probing questions this week. And congratulations to Christopher Cohen for the sextuple spin, the first ever in history. Mark this one on your calendar. You'll remember where you were this day. Anyway, I'll see all of you down the road.